Last time we spoke about the first Okinawa counteroffensive. The US Marines launched a formidable assault on Okinawa, confronting the entrenched Japanese 32nd Army. This dramatic struggle culminated in Operation Tenichigo, Japan's final counteroffensive, marked by the ill-fated mission of the super battleship Yamato, which met its demise under relentless air assault. As American forces advanced, they faced significant resistance, particularly at the Shuri fortified zone. Colonel Yohara voiced concerns over a night counterattack planned for April the 12th, predicting disaster and chaos for the disoriented troops unfamiliar with the terrain. Despite his warnings, Japanese forces executed a counteroffensive that faced harsh setbacks. As the Americans consolidated their gains, pressure mounted on their adversaries. Nevertheless, the relentless nature of the battle highlighted the stark contrast between the courage of the soldiers and the emerging futility of their cause, underscoring the inevitable tide of defeat facing Japan at this pivotal moment in the Pacific War. This episode is The Invasion of Mindanao. Well, hello there. Welcome back to the Pacific War Podcast week by week, and I'm your dutiful host, Greg Watson. But before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about World War II? Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on World War II, and so much more. So go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube, and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Fall and Rise of China podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel found over at YouTube, and Echoes of War found on major podcast platforms. I have to say it here, a big thanks to all of you who came to check out my recent episode on YouTube, which was me exploring the wild and wacky world of Chinese World War II dramas. Honestly, it was insane. A lot of people came and gave a lot of feedback. It seems like it was a big crowd pleaser. Maybe I'm more of a comedian than a historian. And if you go over to Echoes of War, I have a 5-part series covering the Malayan campaign of World War II. And I assure you, it's a little bit tidier than what we covered in this series. If you'd like to further support me, please consider checking out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. Over there, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. By April the 18th, significant progress had been made in the offensive operations against Iwo Jim and the Motonobu Peninsula. As seen in Iwo Jim, most notably, General Hodge's 24th Corps was prepared to launch a full-scale offensive to the south with 3 divisions in line. On the morning of the 19th, following the successful initial advance of the 106th Regiment, the largest artillery concentration ever used in the Pacific War heralded the dawn attack. Simultaneously, the campaign's most extensive airstrike was carried out, bolstered by naval bombardment from Admiral Spruance's fleet. The assault teams moved forward, optimistic that the heavy barrage had either destroyed the enemy or left them 2 days to fight back. However, they soon faced disappointment. The Japanese forces sheltering in their caves had emerged largely unscathed and quickly took up their positions. To the east, General Arnold's 7th Division launched an attack with the 32nd and 184th Regiments targeting Skyline Ridge, Oki Hill, and Hill 178. While most of the 32nd Regiment engaged the entrenched enemy on Skyline Ridge, with support from armored flamethrowers, Colonel Finn's 2nd Battalion and Colonel Green's 2nd Battalion advanced over 500 yards unopposed towards Oki Hill, only to be halted by a fierce barrage of Japanese fire. As efforts to progress stalled throughout the day, they had to retreat, which also compelled Finn's beleaguered 3rd Battalion to withdraw. Meanwhile, the remainder of the 184th Regiment attempted to advance through coral formations of the rocky crags, but was quickly pinned down by determined defenders. 2 medium tanks and 3 armored flamethrowers rumbled southward from the 7th Division's lines on the coastal flats. They passed through Oki and quickly moved into position at the tip of Skyline Ridge. They poured shot and flame into the cluster of enemy-occupied tombs and emplacements at the lower extremity of the ridge. The long jets of orange flame probed all openings in the face of this part of the skyline, and the dark and rolling masses of the smoke billowed upward. This was a new spectacle for the waiting infantry, who had watched in fascination. For the enemy who died in the searing flame inside their strongpoints, there was hardly time to become terror-stricken. This phase of the attack lasted 15 minutes, and then, just after 7 a.m., the infantry moved up. All the Japanese on the forward face of the tip had been killed by the flame, but there were others on the reverse side who denied any advance across the crest. The Battle of the Infantry quickly erupted and smoldered along the narrow knife-edge line of Skyline Ridge. American troops clung desperately to the forward slope through 2 Japanese counterattacks in which the enemy crowded forward into his own mortar fire to hurl grenades and satchel charges. At the same time, General Bradley's 96th Division launched an assault with the 381st and the 382nd Regiments advancing side by side, aiming for Nishibaru Ridge, Tombstone Ridge, and Tanobaro Escarpment. The initial capture of several small hills west of Tombstone Ridge went smoothly, but the 382nd faced stiffer resistance on Tombstone itself, managing to maintain a fragile position along the northwest edge of the ridge and partway down its west slope by nightfall. Meanwhile, the 1st Battalion of the 381st Regiment successfully took Kaniku while pushing towards Nishibaru Ridge. However, most of the assault was executed by the 3rd Battalion, which advanced under heavy fire over the ridge crest to the upper part of Nishibaru Village, where it was ultimately halted and forced to retreat by resilient defenders. In General Grinner's 27th Divisional Sector, the 106th Regiment had already cleared the Machinito Inlet and secured a position at the western end of the Urusei-mura Escarpment. The 2nd Battalion attempted to push south following a successful night attack, but encountered a series of caves, tombs, and tunnels west of Route 1, leading to a stalemate. This marked the beginning of what would later become termed the Item Pocket Battle. Meanwhile, the 1st Battalion of the 105th Regiment conducted a frontal assault on Kakazu Ridge, while Greiner executed a sweeping tank maneuver around the east end of the ridge. The only other 27th Division unit on the front line ready to join in the initial assault was the 1st Battalion of the 105th Infantry. This battalion was deployed along Kakazu Gorge with Kakazu Ridge immediately in front, its initial objective. Company C was on the left, next to the Ginowan-Shuri Road. Companies B and A were to the west, the later being initially in reserve. The attack of the 1st Battalion was planned to combine a frontal assault against the ridge with a sweeping tank attack around the east end of Kakazu Ridge. The two forces were to meet behind the ridge near the village of Kakazu, and then to join a drive to the Urusei-mura Escarpment beyond. The Japanese had guessed that a tank infantry attack would try to penetrate their lines between Nishibaru Ridge and Kakazu Ridge, and they had prepared carefully for it. Their plan was based on separating the infantry from the tanks. The 272nd Independent Infantry Battalion alone devised a fire net of 4 machine guns, 2 anti-aircraft guns, 3 regimental guns, and 81mm mortars of the 2nd Motor Battalion to cover the saddle between the two ridges. The machine guns were sighted at close range. In addition, 2 special squads of 10 men each were sent forward to the saddle for close combat against the infantry. One group was almost entirely wiped out. The other had 1 non-commissioned officer wounded and 3 privates killed. The enemy defense also utilized the 47mm anti-tank guns of the 22nd Independent Anti-Tank Gun Battalion and close-quarter suicide assault squads. So thorough were these preparations that the Japanese boasted, quote, "Not an infantryman got through." It was here that the Kakazu Urusei-mura Escarpment area that the most extensive reorganization of Japanese units had taken place just before the American attack. The remnants of the badly shattered battalions were combined into a composite unit of about 1,400 men that consisted largely of the members of the 272nd Independent Infantry Battalion, but also included elements of the 13th, 15th, and 23rd Battalions. The 21st Independent Infantry Battalion stood ready to support the 272nd. The 2nd Light Machine Gun Battalion added to its firepower. Although the infantry soon found themselves pinned down by intense Japanese fire, the tanks managed to reach Kakazu Village, which was heavily damaged and set ablaze over the next 3 hours. Despite their efforts, the failure of the 1st Battalion eventually compelled the tanks to retreat, prompting the 2nd Battalion of the 105th Regiment to attempt an attack towards the eastern edge of Kakazu Ridge without any success. Meanwhile, the 3rd Battalion descended from Kakazu West, bypassed Kakazu Village, and successfully reached the summit of the Urusei-mura Escarpment. This unexpected achievement led Colonel Wynne to decide to reposition the remainder of the 105th around the western edge of Kakazu Ridge to join the 3rd Battalion on the escarpment, effectively abandoning the main enemy front. In other areas of the escarpment, the 106th Regiment was unable to advance southward but managed to extend its lines eastward to connect with Wynne's 3rd Battalion. Consequently, the major offensive on April 19th failed to produce any significant breakthrough, resulting in 720 casualties. To the north, General Shepherd initiated a final push towards the north coast on the same day, with the 4th and 29th Marine Regiments advancing through complex networks of caves and trenches facing minimal resistance, but they had halted at the elevated terrain around Hill 302. Additionally, patrols from the 22nd Marines moved south from Hito Misaki and successfully captured Aha on the eastern coast. On Iwo Jima, General Bruce also persisted with his main offensive against the Japanese strongholds on Bloody Ridge, as the 3rd Battalion of the 305th Regiment advanced eastwards against the northern section of Iwo, while Colonel Hamilton's 2nd and 3rd Battalions attacked northwards. Backed by artillery and mortars, the infantry engaged the fierce skirmishes marked by hand-to-hand combat, moving from one stronghold to another. Following another preparatory bombardment, Colonel Smith initiated a second assault at 2:30, effectively capturing the slopes of Pinnacle through a series of rushes despite intense machine gun and mortar fire. Leading elements of the 306 came under intense mortar and small arms fire as they left the line of departure 600 yards northeast of the base of Iwo. The Pinnacle loomed above them, its slopes covered with masses of torn and twisted vegetation. Describing the Pinnacle on the morning of the 20th, General Randall, the assistant divisional commander of the 77th, stated this: "It is a damned highly fortified position with caves 3 stories deep, each house concrete with machine guns in and under. Whole area of the village and circumference of the mountain, a maze of machine guns, motors, and gun positions, little affected by artillery fire that we had poured on it." Even as this message was on its way to the 77th Division command post, the 306 was winning a hold on a formidable position. By the end of the day, Smith's 1st Battalion was positioned across the northern slopes of Iwo. The 3rd Battalion had advanced to within 400 yards of the peak on the eastern side, and the 2nd Battalion had pivoted south to keep pace with the other units of the 306. Meanwhile, Hamilton's 2nd Battalion succeeded in securing the buildings on Government House Hill. Coolidge's 1st Battalion regained control of the hill from the east. Hamilton's 3rd Battalion established a line at the base of Iwo, extending to the recently captured Bloody Ridge, and Coolidge's 3rd Battalion made limited progress as it moved slowly eastward. However, during the night, over 400 Japanese troops, including women armed with spears, launched a fierce counteroffensive against Bloody Ridge, nearly forcing the Americans off Government House Hill. By dawn on April the 21st, as the counterattack diminished, resulting in heavy casualties on both sides, Hamilton's 3rd Battalion was dispatched to relieve the 2nd Battalion, starting the cleanup of the now secure Bloody Ridge. Coolidge's 3rd Battalion also successfully repelled a strong counterattack from the north before resuming its advance eastward, destroying several enemy positions as it established a line extending south from the small lake at the southwest base of Iwo. In the meantime, the 306th Regiment strengthened its hold on Iwo throughout the morning, with the 3rd Battalion launching a successful assault on the eastern slopes, while the 1st and 2nd Battalions continued to clear caves and pillboxes on the northern and northwestern slopes. Shortly after noon, Hamilton's 3rd Battalion and Coolidge's 1st Battalion began advancing northward against light resistance to secure the southern slopes of Iwo. Simultaneously, Smith's 2nd Battalion and Coolidge's 3rd Battalion launched a coordinated assault to capture the southwest slopes, where they encountered stronger opposition. By mid-afternoon, all units at the Pinnacle were busy mopping up, systematically destroying and sealing the enemy's underground passages and strongholds over the next 5 days. By mid-afternoon on April the 21st, all units on the Pinnacle were engaged in mopping up. The exterior of the Pinnacle was secure, but Japanese still remained in subterranean passages and strongholds from which they made sallies against the troops. The openings were systematically blown out and sealed off. The 307th alone captured or destroyed during the day 5 81mm mortars, 5 knee motors, and 1 75mm howitzer, with 2 47mm anti-tank guns. These were some of the weapons that had held the Americans off Bloody Ridge for over 3 days. For 5 days after Iwo Jima was declared secure, elements of the 77th Division mopped up remaining groups of the enemy, sealed caves, destroyed pillboxes, marked or removed thousands of mines that were still on the island, and buried the dead. During this period, hundreds of Japanese were killed in and around the Pinnacle, and in the town of Iwo, and the caves along the coastline as well. Removal of the mines in the airfield and on the roads feeding it was given priority in order to speed up the airfield construction. The last noteworthy encounter in Iwo Jima came during the night of April the 22nd to the 23rd, when a group of Japanese soldiers and civilians, including women, all armed with rifles, grenades, and demolitions, rushed from caves on Iwo towards the lines of the 306th. They were all cut down without a single loss to the American troops. Ultimately, during the 6-day battle in Iwo Jima, the Americans killed 4,706 Japanese soldiers and captured 149, suffered 172 deaths, 902 wounded, and 46 missing. Meanwhile, on April the 20th, the 4th and 29th Marine Regiments reached the north coast after eliminating organized resistance on the Matobo Peninsula, resulting in over 2,000 Japanese fatalities, while Shepard's Marines incurred 207 deaths, 757 wounded, and 6 missing. The Fleet Marine Force Amphibious Reconnaissance Battalion seized Yaguchi Island on April the 21st and occupied Susoku Island on April the 22nd, with the 6th Reconnaissance Company making the final landing on Kuri Island on April 23rd. When the reconnaissance unit came aboard rubber boats to Yaguchi-shima, they would find a leper colony of about some 800 adults and 50 children, but no resistance was encountered. Because aerial reconnaissance had reported Suzoku-shima to be occupied and defended, it was decided to launch an attack on that island with one reinforced regiment. But preliminary to the attack, a native was captured during the amphibious reconnaissance of the objective, who revealed that the island was probably not occupied. A successful physical reconnaissance confirmed his statements. Consequently, Major Jones' command was also assigned this mission, and the battalion occupied Suzoku-shima on the 22nd, as I had mentioned. Although no opposition was met, the operation was interfered with by more than 100 civilians moving by canoe from the islands to the west, where food was running low, and, quote, considerable difficulty was involved in corralling and controlling them. On the 23rd, the 6th Reconnaissance Company also mounted on its own supported LVTs to execute a daylight landing on Kurishima, likewise finding no resistance. Concurrently, while the 29th Marines remained on the Matobu Peninsula, the 4th Marines moved to their designated area in northern Okinawa to assist the 22nd Marines in mopping up operations, searching the mountainous interior for remnants of the Udo Force and the independent guerrilla groups. Finally, on the 28th, Colonel Udo's final 200 surviving members were successfully intercepted and eliminated while attempting to flee to the eastern coast, effectively concluding the northern Okinawa operation. It's now time to leave Okinawa and actually return to the southern Philippines to oversee the continuation of General Eichelberger's operations there. By the end of March, General Arnold's Americal Division had successfully taken control of Cebu City and Lohag Airfield, but was encountering stronger resistance in the northern hills. By the end of March, the Americal Division had acquired a good idea of the nature and extent of General Majome's principal defenses, and had learned that it had already overrun some of the strong points along the Japanese outpost line of resistance. With the enemy firmly entrenched and having all the advantages of observation, General Arnold knew the process of reducing Majome's positions would be slow and costly no matter what type of maneuver the American Division employed. Lacking the strength required for wide envelopments and specific information about the Japanese flanks, Arnold hoped he might achieve decisive results with a single sledgehammer blow against the Japanese center. He therefore decided to use the bulk of his strength in a frontal assault into the hills due north of Cebu City. Consequently, on April 1st, the 182nd Regiment, supported by Colonel Cushing's guerrillas, launched a direct assault on the Japanese center, while the 132nd Regiment advanced along the west bank of the Butuanan River, and then they moved westward to flank General Majome's left. Despite slow progress and heavy casualties, by April 11th, the 182nd had diminished most of the significant defensive positions along the center of Majome's second line, and the 132nd had managed to flank the Japanese left, reaching a crucial location to the far left of Majome's final defensive positions. Additionally, the 164th Regiment had landed to bolster the offensive and was quickly advancing through the Mananga Valley to encircle the Japanese right and rear. By April 13th, the 164th reached Babag Ridge, but its surprise attack was promptly repelled by the defenders. Meanwhile, the 132nd and 182nd Regiments resumed their offensives, with the latter capturing the last stronghold along the Japanese second line. Unbeknownst to the Americans, Majome had already concluded that further resistance was futile, and he ordered a general withdrawal northwards to begin on the night of April 16th. In the days that followed, Arnold's 3 regiments engaged in a series of costly small unit attacks, gradually gaining ground inch by inch. On April 17th, organized resistance in the Japanese stronghold began to falter as the defenders retreated, and by the evening, the American Division had neutralized all of Majome's significant fortifications. In response to the Japanese withdrawal, the American Division quickly initiated a pursuit operation, successfully cutting off the retreat route to the remaining forces of the 1st Division in northern Cebu by the end of the month. By the first week of May, the 132nd Regiment launched an offensive to dismantle General Kateoka's organized resistance, aided by guerrilla forces, and largely achieved its objective in a campaign that lasted until the month's end. The Americans and Filipinos then focused on mopping up the remnants of Majome's forces, effectively eliminating the last pockets of Japanese resistance on Cebu by June 20th. Meanwhile, on April 11th, the 3rd Battalion of the 164th Regiment landed unopposed on Bohol, a beaches already secured by Major Ismael Ineguero's guerrillas. Patrols soon located a Japanese garrison inland, leading to the battalion's assault on its main positions from April 17th to April 20th, culminating in overrunning the last organized opposition by the 23rd. On the 26th, the remaining elements of the 164th Regiment landed unopposed on the southern Negros and moved inland to search for the Japanese garrison. By the 28th, they discovered the 174th Independent Battalion, but their initial attacks were successfully thwarted by the defenders. Nonetheless, a coordinated offensive commenced on May the 6th, which successfully compelled the Japanese to retreat and disperse by the end of the month. The 164th then neutralized a final resistance pocket between June the 7th and 12th, effectively ending Japanese opposition on Negros and completing the 8th Army's campaign to reclaim the central Visayan Islands. Eichelberger's operations in the southern Philippines were far from over, however, as Major General Franklin Sibbert's 10th Corps, comprised of the reinforced 24th and 31st Divisions, was preparing to launch the invasion of Mindanao, known as Operation Victor V. The initial strategy had Major General Roscoe Woodruff's 24th Division landing on the shores of Ileana Bay on April the 17th to quickly secure the Malabang-Cotabato area, followed by Major General Clarence Martin's 31st Division 5 days later for the final advance towards Davao. Ileana Bay lies nearly 100 miles northwest of the main objective in the eastern Mindanao, that being the Davao area, and only a poor road connects its beaches to Davao. Still, the 8th Army had ample reason to select Ileana Bay as the site of the initial assault. For one thing, the Army knew that the Japanese had their main concentrations in the Davao region, where they seemed especially well prepared to repel an amphibious assault. It would be foolish to stick one's hand into the hornet's nest if there was no urgency for such an action, and the 8th Army could not, of course, avoid the long view that the Eastern Mindanao operation was in essence a mopping-up campaign rather than an action of great strategic importance. Second, the Ileana Bay area was relatively weakly defended. The 24th Division would have a much better chance to achieve tactical surprise there. Finally, the 10th Corps would have to seize and rehabilitate an airstrip quickly so that land-based aircraft could provide proper support for subsequent operations in eastern Mindanao, as other bases were too distant. A reasonably good strip existed at Malabang on the northwestern shore of Ileana Bay. Given the estimate that the Japanese maintain a weak garrison at Ileana Bay, Malabang seemed a spot for the main assault. However, by early April, Colonel Wendell Fertig's guerrilla forces had taken control of the entire Malabang region, forcing the Japanese garrison to retreat. Consequently, Sibbert adjusted his plan, directing Rear Admiral Albert Noble's Task Group 78.2 to deploy only one battalion at Malabang, with the remaining forces of the 24th Division landing near Parang. The Japanese forces in Mindanao numbered over 43,000, including troops from Lieutenant General Morozumi Giyosaki's 30th Division, Lieutenant General Harada Jiro's 100th Division, and Rear Admiral Doenaji's 32nd Naval Special Base Force. General Suzuki of the 35th Army was in overall command of these troops, but he first needed to escape from Cebu to assert his authority. Thus, Suzuki and his staff departed northern Cebu on April the 10th using 5 landing craft. Fortunately, the boats became separated, leading to an emergency landing near Dumaguete before they could continue their journey on the night of April the 16th. Tragically, Suzuki's vessel was intercepted and destroyed by a PT boat off the southern tip of Cebu on the 17th. Only his chief of staff, Major General Tomichika Yoshiharu, managed to reach Cagayan on the night of the 20th after several days adrift. Nominal command in Mindanao rested with General Morozumi, who became the de jure commander of the 35th Army after General Suzuki's death. But Morozumi chose not to exercise his authority, except insofar as to largely ignore advice from General Tomichika, the 35th Army Chief of Staff, who reached Mindanao in late April. Beset with formidable communication difficulties, and realizing that most of the inhospitable terrain separated the main bodies of the 30th and 100th Divisions, Morozumi believed he could render his best service by staying with the 30th, leaving General Harada and Admiral Doi more or less to their own devices. Neither Harada nor Mizumi had any offensive missions. Rather, in accordance with Yamashita's December 1944 plans, the Japanese on Mindanao were to direct their efforts to pinning down as many American units as possible, in order to delay the progress of the war. Harada and Morozumi had little hope of conducting organized major defensive operations for more than 2 months. Once American forces had overrun their prepared defenses, the two planned to retreat into largely unexplored mountains of east-central Mindanao, organize a last stand area like Yamashita's in the Asin Valley of northern Luzon. The 30th and 100th Divisions were not in good shape to conduct delaying defensive operations either. Hopelessly isolated, short of artillery, small arms ammunition, transportation, and communications equipment, they had no chance of obtaining any supplies. They had some stocks of food, but the transportation shortage coupled with poor condition of eastern Mindanao roads would make it most difficult for the Japanese to move their food from the central depots to the mountains. The Japanese commanders thus knew that once an invasion of eastern Mindanao began, they would enter upon a battle they could not win, and they definitely had no relish for a defense in death. As a result, Morozumi retained command over all the forces in Mindanao, effectively becoming the de jure leader. After an uneventful journey, Sibert's 10th Corps began landing on Mindanao on the morning of the 17th. Troops from the 533rd Engineer Boat and Shore Regiment went ashore on the small Ibus Island, while the 3rd Battalion of the 21st Regiment joined Fertig's guerrillas on the beach near Malabang. Company K secured Bongo Island without any opposition. At about 9 a.m., after an unnecessary 2-hour bombardment by cruisers and destroyers, the 19th Regiment landed at Parang without encountering any resistance, followed by most of the 21st Regiment. That afternoon, the 19th Regiment secured the entire Parang area, and the 24th Reconnaissance Troops scouted the shores of Polak Harbor and the northern entrance of Mindanao River, finding them all clear. On the 18th, Sibert launched an assault against Fort Piquet, with the 19th Regiment advancing along Route 1, and the 21st Regiment utilizing the Mindanao River. The 21st advance was quicker, successfully reaching Paidu Pulangi the next day. However, the 19th Regiment, largely due to poor road conditions and some enemy resistance, prompted Woodruff to order the 21st to withdraw downstream for the night. On the 21st, a battalion from the 34th Regiment arrived at Paidu Pulangi, advancing both overland and along the river to reach Fort Piquet later in the afternoon. The isolated 166th Independent Battalion was ultimately destroyed, with the 19th finally arriving at Fort Piquet on the 23rd. Meanwhile, the 34th continued to push forward and secured Cabacan Junction at Route 1 and Sayre Highway. This quick capture of the junction effectively separated the 30th and 100th Divisions and opened 2 routes of attack, north along the Sare and southeast towards Davao. Consequently, the newly arrived 31st Division was tasked with sending the 124th Regiment to assault the 30th Division's forces in northern Mindanao, while the 34th Regiment continued to advance along Route 1 towards Digos and Davao. In response, Morozumi dispatched reinforcements under Colonel Oichi Koritake to block enemy progress past Omanai, while fortifying the Malay-Balay area. By this time, General Morozumi had swung into action in an attempt to stem the enemy's advance before they moved north into central Mindanao. Colonel Oichi, commander of the 30th Engineer Regiment, was ordered on the 22nd to take command of operations along the southern approaches and to annihilate the enemy south of the east-west line running through Omanai. For this mission, he was given command of the South Sector Unit, as well as engineer units. On April the 23rd, General Tomochika, Chief of Staff of the 35th Army, arrived at the 30th Division's command post at Impulutao from Asugan. Tomochika immediately conferred with Morozumi regarding implementation of the Army policy of a protracted resistance. As a result of this discussion, Morozumi concluded that it was necessary to strengthen the Malay-Balay area. He therefore ordered the transfer of the 1st Battalion 77th Regiment from the North Sector Unit to the Central Sector Unit, and the movement of this battalion to new positions near Malay-Balay. At about the same date, Morozumi ordered the Surigao Sector Unit to move from Ampoyon to the Wallo area, where it was to assist in carrying out the division's self-sufficiency program. Although the 30th Division's commander thus adopted measures to strengthen the area of final resistance, he still considered the landing near Parang a secondary invasion, and he estimated that the main enemy landing would soon be launched in the Ileana Bay area. The preponderance of divisional strength was therefore retained in the north. Led by the 24th Reconnaissance Troop, the 34th Regiment quickly departed from Cabacan on the 24th. Although progress was hampered primarily by destroyed bridges and the poor condition of Route 1, the troops successfully arrived at the outskirts of Digos by the 27th, where they faced approximately 3,350 enemy troops. The Japanese forces urgently prepared to defend against the 24th Division's assault, but they could only hold out until the early hours of April the 28th, when they retreated to the foothills of Mount Apo in the north. Elements of the 34th Regiment pursued the withdrawing Japanese, who maintained their position in the Mount Apo region until May the 9th, when they retreated north to regroup with the rest of the 100th Division. Meanwhile, other units of the 34th and the guerrilla 108th Divisions began patrolling the Davao Gulf Coast, which they successfully cleared by May the 12th. Additionally, the 19th Regiment advanced from Cabacan to Digos, passed through the 34th, and started moving north towards Davao. Facing little resistance along Route 1, the 19th Regiment overwhelmed the last opposition in front of the city and successfully occupied Davao by May the 3rd, with minimal opposition. Meanwhile, on the afternoon of April the 27th, the 124th Regiment departed from Cabacan and quickly confronted the 1st Battalion 74th Regiment, causing it to retreat in some disarray. The 124th then pressed on to the north, facing minimal resistance, and ultimately arrived to Kebawe by May the 3rd. I would like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube, and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. Hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Fall and Rise of China podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you consider checking out my personal channel, the Pacific War Channel, or Echoes of War on all major podcast platforms. I just released a really hilarious episode exploring the wacky world of Chinese World War II dramas over on YouTube. On Echoes of War, we are covering the Malaysian campaign of World War II in 5 episodes. If you'd like to further support me, please consider checking out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. By joining either, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. The American invasion of Mindanao commenced under General Eichelberger. The initial assault targeted Ileana Bay, with the American forces quickly securing key areas. Japanese troops suffering from very low morale and inadequate supplies struggled to mount an effective defense. The campaign marked a pivotal advance in the Pacific War, laying groundwork for further operations.